morning, everyone. We're so delighted to host you here today at the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal. My name is Jennifer Daloisio, and I am the CEO of the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. It's great to be here today with Governor Baker, Lieutenant Governor Polito, Secretary Card, Mayor Mitchell, and members of our legislative delegation to talk about our Commonwealth's ambitious climate goals and the ports that will play a critical role in bringing offshore wind to Massachusetts. This terminal is the first of its kind in the United States, and we're so proud of this facility and our leadership on offshore wind in Massachusetts. What may seem to be a vast open space is in fact a highly engineered site capable of staging the very heavy components of wind farms that will be built off of our south coast in the coming years. The Commonwealth's plans for a net zero future include a minimum of 15 gigawatts of offshore wind energy, and we are well on our way with 3,200 megawatts contracted and another 2,400 megawatts authorized for future procurements. The New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal will serve as the construction base port for the first two offshore wind projects, an instrumental part in building Massachusetts' first projects. But for us to meet our ambitious goals, we will need to invest in infrastructure. Offshore wind is a maritime industry, and the successful establishment of this sector will require the build-out and long-term operations of multiple highly specialized port facilities. Anticipating this growth, MassCEC conducted an offshore wind ports and infrastructure assessments spanning the South Coast, Metro Boston, and more recently the North Shore. What we learned is that there is huge potential up and down the coast to service the offshore wind industry. At these various port facilities, we will stage, pre-assemble, and manufacture turbine components. They will service the ongoing operations and maintenance of our offshore wind farms. MassCEC is thrilled to be here today to launch this Offshore Wind Port Investment Challenge. We're excited to see our historic port communities reinvigorated. Along with public and private partnerships and investments, we can make improvements to port facilities and bring them into active use for this new industry. This will create significant jobs and economic activity in local communities. And with MassCEC's programs that focus on workforce development, we can ensure that these opportunities are equitable and accessible to all of our diverse populations. It's exciting to be here today at the beginning of new growth in the offshore wind industry. Funding for port infrastructure to support the offshore wind industry is critical to our success. This $50 million port challenge will be funded by the Offshore Wind Industry Investment Fund created by the recent COVID relief bill. Further growth in the industry can be propelled by the funding proposed in the Baker-Polito administration's Forward Act and the proposals in the supplemental budget. These investments will enable us here at MassCEC not only to expand offshore wind infrastructure, but also to grow equitable clean energy workforce and accelerate innovative technologies. Our Wind Technology Testing Center in Charlestown and this New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal position Massachusetts as a national and global leader in this industry, and that's just the beginning. The continued investment in offshore wind offers opportunities to reinvigorate our coastal communities, while driving substantial economic growth in our state, as well as serving as the backbone of the state's climate strategy. Together, we will secure a legacy of offshore wind and clean energy leadership here in Massachusetts. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Governor Baker.
Thanks, Jen, and it's great to be back to the windiest place I've ever been on a regular basis here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which is this location right here. There's an old expression about technology that it seems to move really slowly, and then 10 years after a new technology has been pursued, all of a sudden it's everywhere, and people wonder how that happened. Well, that's pretty much what's happening with offshore wind here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The process here began several years ago. The Commonwealth spent about $100 million in this part of the Commonwealth. We are currently spending additional resources in other locations up and down the coast. And the goal here is to put the infrastructure in place, the physical infrastructure, as well as creating the opportunity for people to develop the people skills that are required to take the jobs that will be available in this industry, which will grow dramatically here in Massachusetts and up and down the East Coast of the United States for the better part of the next decade. Now, we happen to be first, and we like being first here in the Commonwealth, but one of the things that comes with being first is the challenges associated with being a little bit ahead of everybody else. And we've gone through some interesting times with our colleagues in the federal government to get some of these projects approved, but the bottom line is, at this point in time, it's pretty clear the feds are going to move quickly to ensure that many of the projects that are currently slated to be developed get developed and built as quickly as possible. Now, obviously, there'll be all kinds of issues around supply chain and all the rest, which is a worldwide phenomenon that we'll all be dealing with. But the bottom line is Massachusetts is well positioned to be a major player, not only in solving many of our own clean energy objectives on a go-forward basis, but to be a provider and a supporter for other folks as they go through the process of building out and benefiting from this burgeoning industry here off the East Coast of the United States. And New Bedford, in many respects, will end up being what I think of as ground zero with respect to a lot of this activity. This particular proposal is $50 million. I want to thank our colleagues from the legislature for putting resources into the first ARPA bill that we signed back in December. I think bids are due this summer, with decisions made sometime in the early fall. Is that about right? So this is on a relatively fast track. But we should stay on a relatively fast track, and we here with respect to this industry, and we should move as quickly as we possibly can to build out as much of it as quickly and as reasonably feasibly possible as we can, and to continue to focus on both the people and the skill building issues, as well as the physical infrastructure that's associated with making this a major part of how we deal with all the issues associated with climate change, energy policy, and the environment going forward. And we are very thrilled to be here today to make this announcement with respect to this RFP. We certainly expect there will be a lot of enthusiastic bidders on it, and we're looking forward to making some awards and getting going and continuing to build on the track we are all running down here to get these facilities up and operating with good jobs and clean energy as soon as we possibly can. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Governor. I'd like to introduce Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Every time we come to the Marine Commerce Terminal, it's always breezy, which is great to amplify the point of why we're here. You'll hear from Mayor Mitchell and Senator Barrett and Representative Cabral in just a moment, and Secretary Card. But we have a great morning here to celebrate what's happening in the first industry of its kind in our nation, right here in Massachusetts, and in particular the south coast of Massachusetts, where the New Bedford port, the Marine Commerce Terminal, is currently the only purpose-built location in the country for offshore wind. It's a pretty exciting endeavor for us to fully embrace, not only here in physically improving this facility, as the governor said, laying out a lot of the groundwork for this part of the process to take place, but even after this, heading over to UMass Dartmouth, where we're making announcements around the investment in people and the workforce that will do the work associated with creating the parts that need to be assembled for wind turbines and platforms and foundations, and then assembling and staging and getting it ready to move into the offshore wind location off the shores of our Commonwealth. It's pretty exciting. And for this RFP, which is part of the federal funds of $50 million, putting this out on the street for a lot of local businesses to come together and present their options to be considered is really exciting, is also for the supply chain, the jobs, the diversity that will come with helping businesses in this part of our Commonwealth expand and be part of setting up this industry. I also want to amplify the governor's point about acceleration, but these awards being made and contracts going out October, November, Vineyard Wind will be ready to activate this site in January. That's how accelerated this pace is. And then Mayflower will come on their heels to start setting up their part of the development. So huge excitement here on the South Coast for our Commonwealth as we lead the nation in creating the offshore wind renewable energy that will help diversify our portfolio of energy and help stabilize rates for ratepayers, business, and individuals in our Commonwealth. So with that, I'd now like to turn it over to Secretary Card.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Governor Baker, Lieutenant Governor Polito, for your leadership on this very important issue. As we all are working together to strive to achieve our decarbonization goals here in Massachusetts in our effort to be prepared to mitigate and become more resilient to climate change, we have a focus of achieving net zero by 2050. Offshore wind is the centerpiece of that work that we're doing here in Massachusetts to help achieve those goals. And the announcement today for this offshore wind port challenge in the $50 million that we are able to make available through our ARPA commitment is a key part of the work that we're doing. As has been said, and as we are seeing right here in New Bedford, we have the need and opportunity to make investments in our ports for marshaling. Right here at the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal, we will have the opportunity to help stand up the Vineyard Wind offshore wind development, and Mayflower will be right on its heels. And New Bedford is a really important part of that. But we have other ports in Massachusetts where we also need to make investments if we're going to continue to support this important industry. We need to make investments across the board. The good news is that this $50 million that we're making available today will also help to leverage additional private and local in-kind contributions to the effort. So we're working as a team, and we really look forward to those partnerships. But it's also part of a larger plan. We have opportunities through the Forward Act, which is an economic development bill, which also includes $1.2 billion in environmental and energy infrastructure funds. $750 million of those dollars are intended to be used to help support our renewable energy portfolio here in Massachusetts. Things like research, innovation, and workforce, all of the things that will help Massachusetts continue to be a leader in this industry. That on top of Governor Baker's supplemental budget proposal, which also includes $100 million for investments in our ports. It's all part of, many pieces to the pie, and we need all of it to ensure our continued leadership, our continued work, and perhaps most importantly, our efforts to achieve our decarbonization goals here in Massachusetts. So it's a wonderful day today to kick off this announcement for this RFP. We look forward to seeing proposals at the end of July and then making announcements a few months thereafter. Time is of the essence. We have opportunities with these ARPA dollars to make once-in-a-generation investments in these really important components of our environmental and energy portfolio, and we're really looking forward and excited for the opportunity. So thank you for being here. And it is now my privilege to introduce the Mayor of New Bedford, Jon Mitchell. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Card, and welcome everybody to the Port of New Bedford. We successfully ordered up a little light breeze to really emphasize why we're here today. Let me begin by offering up some words of thanks to Governor Baker for these infrastructure commitments. We've talked a little bit about the expansion of the terminal. There's funding for that set aside that was announced previously, some $30 million, and that will be used very well in the years ahead, and we appreciate that and appreciate the commitments to other offshore wind related infrastructure in the port. Most recently, the funding commitment for a match for a grant that we have pending right now with the federal government for Leonard's Wharf, and more to come. But we appreciate, Governor, your recognition of the need for infrastructure investments. It's something we've talked a lot about. I want to just acknowledge the work of your administration, Lieutenant Governor Polito, Secretary Card, of course, and the work of others. Bruce Carlisle has done such an able job heading up the Commonwealth's offshore wind efforts, our interim port director, George Krikorian, and the executive director of the New Bedford Ocean Cluster, Jen Downing. I think we all recognize why it is that infrastructure investment right now is so important, and why your pending legislation, the Forward Act, Governor, it will be key to the competitiveness of New Bedford and by extension Massachusetts in the years ahead. And I think it's necessary to say exactly why that is. So we've been at the offshore wind game for a while now, really for the whole decade that I've been in office. And the reason for it is that it relates specifically to our overall strategy of regenerating what is an older industrial city in the northeastern United States. We live in an American economy where increasingly over the decades, the spoils have gone to the superstar cities. The closest one to us is Boston, but New York's another one, and they're right down the coast and all across America. And we've seen a lot of the political division in our country cut across the fault lines of major metros and non-major metros, and there's lots of reasons for it. We can talk about some other day, but what we're trying to do here is do what we must, which is compete against others in an industry in which we have competitive advantages. We do out on the water here, what we do out in the water here is better than anybody else in the United States. This is the biggest commercial fishing port in America, hands down. And we know that the skills, the infrastructure, the geographic proximity to natural resources, all these things are things that we can parlay into new investment and to cultivate still more investment with the ultimate aim of creating opportunities for our residents in a city that has long suffered from high unemployment, of the loss of talent, the loss of local institutions. This is we here are representative of a big part of America. We're not part of a major metro, but we've got to compete nevertheless. So infrastructure right now for the offshore wind industry is the foundation of that competitiveness. The reason offshore wind is here is because it's a maritime business. The vessels have to pull up somewhere, to state the obvious. And what happens onshore is a natural outgrowth of that, not just here in Greater New Bedford, but far beyond throughout Massachusetts. So in many ways, to a great degree, what happens here in Massachusetts, what happens here in New Bedford, it will happen in Massachusetts. Whether Massachusetts succeeds in offshore wind will be whether this linchpin of a port succeeds. And so therein lies the reason for port investment. We were the leader. We were the first mover 8 or 9 years ago when this terminal was built. A report was published this week by the Business Network for Offshore Wind, one of the leading consortia of businesses in the offshore wind space, that said that there are some 19 ports between Massachusetts and South Carolina that will have in the next 5 years some offshore wind activity. 19. So there's our competition, and we're in it to win it. It's not good enough for us to be one of 19. It's not good enough for us to be an also-ran. And the reason for that is not just sort of a claim or anything like that. It's because if you are seen as a place where, by the industry, where you have to be, if you're a leader, if you're the center of a cluster, that will beget more investment. We see it here with fishing. You see it in the Boston area with life sciences and other industries. That's what we're really aiming for here. Again, with the ultimate goal of creating opportunity for the residents of our city and enabling Massachusetts as a whole to compete. So the legislation that is now pending before the legislature is critical to getting out ahead of the competition. The offshore wind business is coming. It's going to set up shop somewhere. We want it to set up shop here. So I want to thank Tony Cabral, who's here, and the rest of our legislative delegation. Senator Barrett, welcome back to New Bedford. We appreciate your support for offshore wind. It's going to be really important in the next few months to get the governor's bill over the finish line. It's the right kind of investment at the right time for Massachusetts generally, and it has our full support here in the New Bedford area. We've got to get behind it. We've got to put our shoulder behind it. It's the kind of timely decision that will prove historic in the long run. And Governor, we thank you for making it a priority. Thanks, everybody.
I think Representative
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to introduce Representative Cabral.
Senator Barrett.
Tony Cabral never looked so good. I'm State Senator Michael Barrett. I am Senate Chair of the committee that handles climate policy. We have a major legislation having to do with offshore wind in conference committee right now, and then of course we've got the governor's very important proposal with regard to the expenditures of ARPA funds. So we have two roads to travel over the course of the next 60 days. I want to thank Representative Cabral. I want to thank Senator Rodrigues and Senator Montigny for leading the effort on behalf of offshore wind for the entire state of Massachusetts. And I want to thank the executive branch, the Baker administration, for having put us in such a competitive position. But I also want to echo the mayor and his point about 19 potential ports, and so the importance of our early investment here. When you take a look at that list of 19, this physical facility stands out, but Portsmouth, Virginia, for very different reasons, also ranks very well. So we are in a foot race. Our early competitive advantage does not guarantee ultimate victory here in the race for development and for jobs. We are in a competition. When my committee speaks to the developers who have already won the contracts to build offshore wind farms, the first thing they emphasize to us, they actually have a very short list. There aren't a whole bunch of things they need from Massachusetts right now. But the number one thing they list for us is investment in onshore port facilities. Number one by far. So we are standing at a moment not only where we've got the physical site that we need to outcompete Virginia and Maryland and New York and New Jersey and Rhode Island, all of whom would like to be where we stand today and possibly in the end outpace us. But we're also at a moment where we've got the dollars, the federal dollars to invest. And so it's particularly satisfying that the legislature acted on this first $50 million and put it into play. Looking forward to working with the legislative delegation and the executive branch. I'm very pleased to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Please welcome Representative Cabral.
Well, good morning. I'm delighted to be here again, and welcome to New Bedford, all of you, in particular the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the secretary, and my good friend on the other side of the State House, Senator Barrett, who has been instrumental in getting us to the point where we are today. You know, first let me thank the governor and the lieutenant governor for really keeping the pedal to the metal on this issue. The importance of us moving forward and moving forward quickly in order for us to continue to lead and outpace the other communities and the other states that are also on this race to be in the offshore wind industry. My fight and the fight of this delegation is to make sure that New Bedford continues to be the hub of offshore wind, not only physically, with this facility being the first designed and built specifically for this new industry, but also the infrastructure necessary around supply and demand, the supply chain, the workforce development, the kind of skills and know-how that we need to build. You know, this is primarily a maritime industry. It's an industry that has a lot of challenges, can be rewarding, but it can be very dangerous. So it's important that the workforce is ready and on day one to actually work in this industry and work safely in this industry. So today's announcements here and at UMass Dartmouth it really is around building the other infrastructural needs around human needs, in particular workforce development, supply chain. And the supply chain is very, very important for us here in New Bedford and in Massachusetts, because that's where the majority of the jobs will end up. Once we build out offshore the turbines, then the concentration will be really on that supply chain, and that's why we're going to produce a lot of the jobs, good paying jobs that we need for our folks in New Bedford and for the workers in Massachusetts. So stay tuned. I think there is more to come. Again, I want to thank Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito for really staying focused and moving the post every day to make sure that we continue to lead not only the East Coast but across the country on this industry. So I'm delighted that I have the opportunity to work with them, work with the mayor and my colleagues on the Senate side to make sure that we stay in the lead, make sure that we create the kind of jobs that are needed, good paying jobs with good benefits, and create the opportunities for all of us and all the taxpayers in New Bedford in particular. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you all for coming today. We really look forward to this port challenge. We look forward to receiving the proposals at the end of July and looking forward to the fall when we will hope to make announcements and be back with you in the September-October timeframe. So thank you.